I woke up from surgery to a nightmare. Still groggy, I checked my phone. Dozens of missed calls. My parents had left my 2-year-old twins alone so they could go gamble. And when I confronted them, they laughed and said, "You're the problem, Lauren." Hi, I'm Lauren. And this is the moment I realized my parents never saw me as their daughter, just as a wallet. But here's the real question. What would you do if the people who raised you treated you like nothing more than a paycheck? Drop a "am" in the comments if you've ever had to cut ties with toxic family, or tell me what's your take on this. Let's talk. The fluorescent hospital lights buzzed softly above me, casting an artificial glow over the sterile room. The beeping of the monitors filled the silence, a sharp contrast to the festive hum of Christmas Eve outside. I could hear the distant sound of holiday music from the nurses' station, the occasional burst of laughter from staff trying to find some joy in working the holiday shift. But in my room, there was no joy, only pain. I shifted slightly, wincing as the sharp ache in my abdomen reminded me why I was here. The painkillers weren't working as well as they should, or maybe it was just that my mind was elsewhere, on my 2-year-old twins, Ethan and Emma. They were in the corner of the room, quietly stacking blocks, blissfully unaware that their mother was about to be wheeled into surgery. I clutched my phone in my trembling hands, staring at the screen. My thumb hovered over the call button. I had no choice. I took a shaky breath and hit dial. The phone rang once, twice. Then my mother's voice came through, bright and cheerful, laced with just enough irritation to remind me that I was an inconvenience. "Lauren, it's Christmas Eve," she said. "This better not be another one of your crises." I swallowed hard. "Mom, I need you and Dad to come watch the twins. I'm in the hospital. I need emergency surgery." There was a beat of silence, just long enough for me to feel the weight of what I was asking. Then a scoff. "Lauren, we have plans. We've had these Elton John tickets for months." I blinked, stunned. I understand, but I don't have anyone else. Please, Mom, just for tonight. I'll pay you for your time if that's what it takes." I heard rustling on the other end, my father's voice cutting in, gruff and impatient. "You're becoming a real burden, Lauren. We're retired now. We deserve to enjoy our lives without your constant problems." I opened my mouth, but no words came. A burden. That's what I was to them. Not their daughter, not a single mother who had been widowed just 6 months ago, not a woman struggling to raise 2 toddlers alone while grieving the sudden loss of her husband. A burden. The weight of it crushed me. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "I send you $2,500 a month, every month. Even after James died, I never stopped helping you." My voice cracked, but I kept going. "And you can't give me one night?" My father let out a humorless chuckle. "That was your choice to send us that money. We never forced you, and frankly, you should have planned better if you can't take care of your own kids." My grip on the phone tightened. "Dad." "Lauren," my mother cut in, her voice dripping with irritation. "You always do this. You act like the victim. We have a life, too. We're not responsible for you." I felt the blood drain from my face. Not responsible for me. It was like they had forgotten everything. Forgotten the nights I spent taking care of them when they were sick. Forgotten the times I bailed them out when they mismanaged their finances. Forgotten that I had sacrificed my own savings to make sure they kept their home after my dad's early retirement. I had spent my whole life trying to be the daughter they wanted. The responsible one. The one who never asked for anything in return. And here I was, begging for help, just this once. And they were choosing a concert over their own grandchildren. The pain in my abdomen twisted, sharp and relentless. I shut my eyes. "Forget it," I whispered. "I'll figure it out." I hung up before they could say anything else. For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. I stared at my twins, their little faces full of innocence, completely oblivious to the rejection I had just endured. Then I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder. I turned to see Susan, my nurse, looking at me with quiet understanding. "Do you have anyone else to call?" I swallowed. "No." She hesitated, then offered, "I have a friend." Her name is Rachel Adams. She's a professional nanny, specializes in childhood trauma. I can call her for you." I let out a shaky breath. "Yes, please." Susan gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze before stepping away to make the call. I glanced at the twins again. Ethan had crawled onto Emma's lap, giggling as she tried to wrap her tiny arms around him in an unsteady hug. They were all I had. I had spent years thinking that family meant sacrifice, that no matter what, you take care of your own. But my parents had just proven to me in the cruelest way that family isn't always blood. The doors to my hospital room swung open, and the nurses came in to prep me for surgery. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, my father's voice echoed in my mind. "We're not responsible for you." Maybe they weren't, but I was finally starting to understand. I wasn't responsible for them either. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the first thing I registered as I drifted into consciousness. The room was dim, save for the pale blue glow of the machines beside me. A dull, throbbing pain pulsed through my abdomen, a constant reminder that my body had been torn open and stitched back together. I blinked against the haze of medication, trying to push past the fog in my mind. My throat was dry, my limbs heavy, but none of that compared to the weight pressing against my chest. Memories of the phone call came rushing back. "You're becoming a real burden, Lauren. We're not responsible for you." Their words clung to me like a stain I couldn't scrub off. Even after everything I had done for them, after years of bending over backward, sending them money every single month, sacrificing my own security to make sure they were comfortable, they still saw me as nothing more than a nuisance, a problem to be dealt with, a burden. I turned my head slightly, wincing as the stitches pulled against my skin. My phone sat on the tray table beside my bed, the screen dark, but I knew the moment I touched it, it would light up with their messages. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The screen illuminated, casting a harsh glow against the darkness. 17 missed calls, a dozen unread messages, all from them. I didn't have to open them to know what they said. I could already hear my mother's voice in my head. "How could you do this to us?" I could already picture my father's indifference. "You're being dramatic." A fresh wave of anger surged through me, mixing with the exhaustion and pain. I had let this go on for too long. For years, I had convinced myself that this was what family did, that my role as a daughter was to take care of them, no matter the cost to myself. Even after James died, when I was drowning in grief, I still sent them their monthly check. I told myself it was duty, that it was love. But love wasn't supposed to feel like this. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. With slow, deliberate movements, I opened my banking app, my hands shaking as I scrolled to the automatic transfers. $2,500 every month, without fail. I stared at the number, the amount that had bled me dry while they used it to fund their luxuries, their dinners, their vacations, their concerts. My fingers hovered over the screen. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I canceled the transfer. A confirmation message popped up. Recurring transfer to Mark and Diane Carter has been successfully canceled. It was done. I exhaled, sinking back against the pillows. A part of me had expected to feel guilty, to feel that old familiar ache of obligation clawing at me. But instead, for the first time in my life, I felt free. The relief was short-lived. My phone vibrated violently in my hand. The messages started pouring in. "Mom, what did you just do?" "Mom, Lauren, fix this now." "Dad, you can't just cut us off like this. We've planned our finances around that money." "Mom, you ungrateful brat. After everything we've done for you?" "Mom, you're punishing us because we had plans. Are you serious?" "Dad, grow up, Lauren. This is pathetic." My stomach twisted. Not a single, "Are you okay?" Not a single, "How was your surgery?" Not even a fake attempt at concern. I read the messages again, letting the reality of them sink in. I had been nothing more than a paycheck to them. I gripped the phone tighter, my hands shaking with rage. For so long, I had desperately wanted to believe they loved me in their own way, that maybe, Just maybe their selfishness was just a blind spot, something I could fix if I was good enough, if I gave enough. But I saw it clearly now. There was nothing I could give them that would ever be enough. I set my phone down, exhaling a long, slow breath. I wasn't going to respond. Not this time. A soft knock on the door made me jump. "Lauren?" I looked up. A woman stood in the doorway, her warm brown eyes scanning me with quiet concern. She was in her late 30s, dressed simply but neatly with an air of quiet confidence. "I'm Rachel," she said gently, stepping inside. "Susan told me you might need some help." I blinked at her, momentarily thrown. She wasn't family. She wasn't someone who had any obligation to me, and yet she was here. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat, forcing myself to sit up slightly. "I don't know what to do. I don't have anyone else." Rachel nodded as if she understood exactly what I meant. "That's okay," she said, moving to sit beside me. "We'll figure it out together." Something in my chest cracked open. The dam broke. I didn't even realize I was crying until Rachel reached for my hand, her grip firm and steady. She didn't tell me to stop. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. She just held my hand. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel so alone. I woke up from surgery to a nightmare. Morning light seeped through the blinds, casting pale streaks across the sterile hospital walls. My body ached in ways I hadn't anticipated. My abdomen was a pulsing reminder of the procedure, my throat raw from the breathing tube. But it wasn't just the physical pain that made my chest tighten. It was the suffocating weight of something much worse. A restless stir came from the corner of the room. I turned my head slightly, spotting Rachel on the small couch, her head tilted back, eyes closed in a light sleep. Beyond her, Ethan and Emma lay curled together on a blanket, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each peaceful breath. Relief flooded me. They were safe. They were here. But something was wrong. A sick sense of dread clawed its way into my stomach. I wasn't sure why until I reached for my phone. The screen lit up instantly. Dozens of missed calls, a flood of unread messages, all from my parents. A chill ran through me as I scrolled through the notifications. Call after call, text after text, voicemail after voicemail. My pulse quickened as I opened the first message from my mother. "Mom, Lauren, call us back now." "Mom, this is ridiculous. You are blowing this way out of proportion." "Dad, answer your damn phone." "Mom, we did nothing wrong. You need to stop acting like a victim." "Mom, how could you do this to us? After all we've done for you?" I frowned, confusion mingling with exhaustion. What the hell were they talking about? Then I saw Rachel's name in the thread. A slow, creeping unease spread through my chest as I clicked on the next message. "Mom, that nanny of yours needs to stay out of family matters." "Dad, we trusted you to be reasonable, Lauren. But apparently, you'd rather be spiteful." My heart pounded in my ears. I looked at Rachel, still asleep, unaware that my world was unraveling all over again. I wasn't sure I wanted to keep reading, but I forced myself to. Then I found it. "Mom, it's not like we left them alone in the street. Mom, they were fine. The staff knew we'd be back soon. Mom, you should be grateful we even agreed to take them at all." I stopped breathing. No. I sat up too fast, pain flaring across my abdomen, but I didn't care. My fingers trembled as I scrolled back to the beginning of the messages. I had assumed, stupidly assumed, that despite everything, despite their selfishness, my parents had at least kept my children safe. But they hadn't. They had left them. Not with a trusted friend, not with a responsible adult. They had dropped off my 2-year-olds with a hotel staff member and disappeared into a casino. I gagged, bile rising in my throat. The betrayal was so deep, so profound, that for a moment I couldn't move. My phone nearly slipped from my hands as I forced myself to type. My vision blurred with rage, with devastation. My whole body trembled as I sent the message. Me. How could you abandon my kids? The response came instantly. Mom, you're being dramatic. They were fine. Mom, this is exactly why we say you're impossible to deal with. "Mom, you are the problem, Lauren, not us." The world tilted. The pain in my body, the ache in my abdomen, the stitches pulling at my skin, none of it compared to the way my chest caved in at those words. You are the problem. Not them, not the parents who had chosen gambling over their own grandchildren. Mister, I barely registered the sound of movement until Rachel's voice cut through the fog. "Lauren?" Her voice was still thick with sleep, laced with concern. "What's wrong?" I turned my head toward her slowly, my face numb. I must have looked as shattered as I felt because Rachel immediately stood and came to my side. "They left them," I whispered, the words barely making it past my lips. Rachel frowned. "Who?" "My parents." I swallowed, forcing the truth out. "They left Ethan and Emma alone at a hotel desk while they went gambling." Rachel's expression darkened instantly. "Are you serious?" I nodded, my throat closing up. I didn't even realize I was crying until Rachel reached out and wiped a tear from my cheek. She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't tell me to calm down. Instead, she said something I had never heard from my own parents. "That is not okay, Lauren." A sob clawed its way up my throat. "They think I'm overreacting," I said, my voice cracking. "They think—" I broke off, shaking my head. "They don't care, Rachel. They never did." Rachel exhaled slowly, her eyes full of something I couldn't name. Then she said, firmly and without hesitation, "It's time to cut them out completely." I blinked at her, stunned by the sheer certainty in her voice. I started, but the words got stuck in my throat. Could I really do it? Could I really walk away for good? I looked at my phone again, at the barrage of messages, none of them asking if I was okay, none of them expressing even an ounce of remorse. And for the first time, I saw things for what they really were. They had never loved me the way parents were supposed to, not unconditionally, not in a way that wasn't transactional. They loved what I gave them, the money, the stability, the security. And now that I had taken that away, I was nothing to them. A deep, aching sadness settled in my chest, but beneath it, something else, something I wasn't used to feeling. Clarity. I wiped at my face, straightened my back despite the pain, and did something I never thought I would do. I blocked their numbers, every single one. I didn't say goodbye. They wouldn't have listened anyway. Rachel squeezed my hand once, then stood. "I'll get the kids some breakfast," she said softly. "You should rest. You've been through enough." I nodded, too drained to argue. I lay back against the pillows, my mind quiet for the first time in years. I knew this wasn't the end of it. My parents wouldn't just accept this and walk away. And 2 weeks later, my instincts were proven right, because someone knocked at my door. The knock came again, loud, impatient. I knew before I even reached the door who it was. For 2 weeks, my parents had been eerily silent. No calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive email from my mother. After the way I had cut them off, I expected backlash, but the silence had been almost worse. It wasn't surrender. It was the calm before the storm. And now, standing in my small apartment, staring at the door, I could feel the storm waiting on the other side. I inhaled sharply, squared my shoulders, and opened the door. There they were, Mark and Diane Carter. My father stood stiffly in his tailored coat, arms crossed, his face tight with irritation. My mother clutched her designer purse like it was a lifeline, her lips pressed into a thin line. They looked out of place in my modest home, like two people who had wandered into a lifestyle beneath them. My mother was the first to speak. "Lauren," she said, voice dripping with forced sweetness, "we need to talk." I didn't move. "There's nothing to talk about." My father scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. Let us in." I didn't let them in. Instead, I stepped into the doorway, blocking their view of the apartment behind me. My mother sighed dramatically. "You're being childish." I folded my arms. "And you're at my doorstep, uninvited. What do you want?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. My father shifted his weight, exhaling sharply through his nose. Then, as if deciding to skip the pleasantries, he cut straight to the point. "We need the money, Lauren." A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Of course, it wasn't about me. It was never about me. I told you, I said evenly. I'm not sending you anything anymore. My mother's face hardened. You don't mean that. I held her gaze. I do. A flash of something, panic, anger, desperation, flickered in my father's eyes. Lauren, listen, he said, adopting his reasonable tone, the one he used when trying to manipulate me. Your mother and I, we've adjusted our lifestyle based on your support. We count on that money every month. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. And that's my problem. How? His jaw clenched. We are your parents. And I was your personal bank account, I shot back. My mother gasped as if I had slapped her. That is so unfair. Is it? My voice rose, the anger boiling over now. You planned your finances around my money, the money that was supposed to help me take care of my kids, to rebuild my life after James died, and you just expected me to keep paying? Forever? My father exhaled, shaking his head. Lauren, you're being irrational. No, Dad, you are. My voice was steady now, the kind of steady that only comes when a person has reached their breaking point. I lost my husband. I have 2 toddlers to raise. And you... I let out a dry laugh. You couldn't even be bothered to watch them for one night. My mother bristled. We had plans, Lauren. Elton John tickets, I said flatly. Right. Priorities. My father let out a frustrated breath. This conversation is going nowhere. Because they weren't here to listen. They never were. They were here to demand, to take. And when they didn't get what they wanted, they would turn it around on me, make me the bad guy. They had perfected that routine years ago. But this time, I wasn't playing. My father took a step closer. You need to understand, Lauren. No. I cut him off. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice firm. You need to understand. I am not your ATM. I am your daughter. Or maybe... I let out a sharp exhale, meeting his gaze dead on. Maybe I never was. Something changed then. For a split second, my father's expression faltered. It was the briefest flash of something, a crack in his usual indifference. And then it was gone. Replaced with anger. His posture stiffened, his face darkened. If this is how you want to be, he said coldly, then fine. But don't think there won't be consequences. I narrowed my eyes. What's that supposed to mean? My mother gave me a tight, almost pitying smile. You're not the only one in this family, Lauren. Do you really think people are going to take your side in all of this? Realization hit me like a slap. They were going to turn everyone against me. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins. They were going to tell them some twisted version of this story, paint me as the cruel daughter who abandoned her parents for no reason. It shouldn't have surprised me. And yet, it still hurt. My father smirked. You'll see. A thick silence settled between us. I could hear my own heartbeat, the tension so sharp it could cut through steel. Then, slowly, I stepped back inside and grabbed the door. I don't care, I said, and slammed the door in their faces. For a moment, I just stood there, my hands gripping the doorknob, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. I should have felt relief. I should have felt powerful. Instead, I felt doubt. Had I done the right thing? Had I really cut them off for good? The doubts twisted in my chest like vines, wrapping around my ribs, squeezing tight. But deep down, beneath the uncertainty, beneath the lingering ache of guilt, I knew there was no going back. The first message came in before I had even finished making breakfast. I had just set Ethan and Emma up at the small kitchen table with their bowls of cereal when my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't think much of it until it buzzed again and again. By the time I picked it up, there were 30 unread messages. I unlocked the screen, dread curling in my stomach as I read the first one. Aunt Patty. Lauren, I just heard what happened. I can't believe you would do this to your own parents. Then another. Cousin Michael. Seriously? You cut them off completely? Then another. Uncle Ray, you should be ashamed of yourself. I stopped breathing. The texts kept coming, each one more infuriating than the last. Aunt Sharon, they're struggling, Lauren. How could you just abandon them? Cousin Lisa, they're your parents. You owe them at least some respect. My chest tightened. I knew this would happen. I had known, the moment I shut that door in their faces, that my parents wouldn't just accept it, that they wouldn't sit with the reality of their own actions. No, they'd rewrite the story. And now, here it was, playing out in real time. I scrolled up, searching for context, and then I found it. A mass group text from my father sent late last night. Dad, it pains me to say this, but we have no choice but to share what Lauren has done. Dad, after everything we've sacrificed for her, she's turned her back on us completely. We never asked for much, only a little help so we could survive. But instead of being a good daughter, she has abandoned us in our time of need. Dad, we just wanted to spend Christmas with our family, but she wouldn't even let us do that. I let out a harsh laugh, anger bubbling beneath my skin. They made it sound like I had left them to rot in the streets, like I had just decided one day to be cruel, like I hadn't spent years carrying their weight on my back. There was no mention of the $2,500 a month I had given them for years. No mention of them choosing a casino over their own grandchildren. No mention of me waking up from surgery to find out my children had been abandoned. I felt like I was going to be sick. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. It doesn't matter what they say. You know the truth. But the truth didn't matter when no one wanted to hear it. A loud ding startled me, and I glanced down, expecting another attack. But this time, it wasn't. It was Melissa. Melissa, can we talk? I stared at the screen. Melissa and I weren't close. She had always been my parents' golden child, the one who never questioned them, the one who, even as an adult, still basked in their approval. And yet, she was the only one who hadn't come at me with accusations. I hesitated for only a second before responding. Me? Yeah, come over. 2 hours later, Melissa stood in my doorway. She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She wasn't wearing her usual bright confidence. She looked uncertain. Hey, I said, stepping aside to let her in. She hesitated, then walked inside. Her eyes flickered around my apartment, landing briefly on Ethan and Emma, who were now playing on the floor. They look happy, she said. They are, I said, voice tight, because they're safe. Melissa turned to face me. I don't know what to believe, Lauren. I exhaled, crossing my arms. Then let me tell you everything. And I did. I told her about the surgery. I told her about the phone call. I told her how our parents refused to help, then left my kids behind to go gamble. I told her how they had been draining me financially for years. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I didn't plead for her to believe me. I just laid it all out. By the time I was done, Melissa was pale. She sat down heavily on the couch, shaking her head. They said you just cut them off, that it came out of nowhere. I let out a sharp breath. Of course they did. Melissa stared at the floor, silent for a long moment. Then, in a quiet, uncertain voice, she said, I never questioned them before. I swallowed, waiting. Melissa lifted her gaze to mine. Maybe I should have. A strange, unexpected warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a grand declaration. But it was something. It was the first crack in the armor of their lies. And for the first time in my life, I felt hope that I wasn't standing in this fight alone. The past due notices were stacked high on the kitchen counter, their bold red lettering practically screaming from the unopened envelopes. Mark Carter sat at the head of the table, flipping through the pile with a scowl. His wife, Diane, stood nearby, arms crossed, her nails tapping against her forearm in irritation. The house, their once pristine, lavish home, felt different now. Gone were the carefree days of mindless spending, of expensive dinners, of cruises booked months in advance. Now, unpaid bills cluttered the surfaces, and the reality of their financial ruin had settled in like a cold, unwelcome guest. And now, this, a foreclosure notice. Diane exhaled sharply. We have 60 days before the bank takes the house. Mark tossed the notice onto the table. We wouldn't even be in this mess if Lauren had just... Diane threw up her hands. Well, she did, Mark. She cut us off, so now what? A silence stretched between them, and then, as if struck by sudden inspiration, Diane grabbed her phone. Mark frowned. Who are you calling? Diane didn't answer. She tapped the screen, brought the phone to her ear, and forced a sickly sweet tone into her voice. Melissa, sweetheart, she said the moment the call connected. We need to talk. Melissa Carter had never seen the house like this before. Growing up, it had always been spotless, an untouchable symbol of their wealth and status, a house that radiated control. Now it looked like a graveyard of bad decisions. The mail had piled up in unopened stacks. The expensive decor felt like a mockery against the financial ruin they had created. And her parents, always so poised, so sure of themselves, looked desperate. Diane poured her a cup of tea, forcing a strained smile. We wouldn't ask, honey, but we're in a bit of a tough spot. Melissa's stomach twisted. They didn't even pretend to invite her over for anything else. There was no, how have you been? No, let's catch up. Just straight to the ask. Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Your sister, he said, voice dripping with disdain, decided to be cruel. She's abandoned us, left us to struggle after everything we've done for her. Melissa stared at them, gripping her teacup tightly. She wanted to believe them. She wanted to fall back into the comfortable version of reality where her parents were the victims, and Lauren was just being difficult. But after everything Lauren had told her, after seeing the truth in her sister's eyes, she couldn't ignore the nagging doubt. How much do you need? Melissa asked carefully. Diane perked up. Just a small loan to hold us over. How much? Melissa repeated. Mark cleared his throat. $144,000. Melissa choked on her tea. A loan? She sputtered. Are you serious? Mark sighed loudly, rubbing his temples. We wouldn't ask if we had any other choice. Melissa's pulse pounded in her ears. Lauren had been paying them every single month. She had been shouldering their financial burden for years, and yet now that she was gone, their entire world was collapsing. Melissa set her cup down, a sick feeling rising in her chest. I need to see your finances. Diane blinked. What? If I'm going to consider helping, Melissa said, steadying herself, I need to see exactly where the money's been going. Mark scoffed. Melissa, come on. I want to see it. For the first time in her life, Melissa was demanding answers, and they didn't like it. They gave in too easily. That alone made Melissa suspicious. She sat at the desk in her father's office, their laptop open in front of her, their financial records spread out before her like a crime scene. The more she read, the more her stomach twisted. The credit card debt, the second mortgage on the house, the thousands spent on luxury purchases. She had known things were bad, but she hadn't realized they were this bad. Her eyes landed on a manila folder, tucked beneath the pile of bank statements. She almost didn't open it, but something compelled her to. Her breath hitched as she pulled out the first document, an adoption certificate. Her hands trembled. Lauren wasn't their biological daughter. The room spun. The paper crinkled in her shaking grip as she scanned the details. Lauren had been adopted as a baby. Her whole life, Melissa had thought they were full-blooded sisters. She had thought Lauren was just another child born into their family, but their parents had never told her. Why? A horrifying realization crept into her mind, because it never mattered to them, not in the way it should have. Lauren hadn't been raised as a beloved daughter. She had been raised as an investment, a backup plan, a safety net, a source of income. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. She stormed downstairs, the papers clutched in her hands. Mark and Diane were still in the kitchen, looking up as she entered. Melissa's voice shook. You never told me. Diane's expression barely flickered. Told you what? Melissa slammed the papers onto the table. That Lauren is adopted. For a moment, silence. Then Diane sighed. Oh, for God's sake, she muttered, waving a dismissive hand. What does it matter? Melissa's stomach dropped. She turned to Mark, hoping, praying for a different reaction. Mark merely shrugged. She still owes us. The final piece clicked into place. Melissa had spent her whole life believing that Lauren was the difficult one, that Lauren was the problem, that Lauren was the selfish one, that Lauren was always overreacting. And now, standing in her parents' kitchen, staring at their cold, unapologetic faces, she realized the truth. Lauren had never been the problem. They were. Melissa grabbed her purse, her heart hammering. "Melissa!" Diane called, her voice still annoyed, as if this was all some minor inconvenience. "Don't overreact. This doesn't change anything." Melissa turned at the door, her breath shaky. "It changes everything." And then, without another word, she left. She drove straight to Lauren's apartment. Her fingers hovered over her phone as she pulled into the parking lot. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to say it. So she just typed, "Melissa, I need to see you. Now." And she waited. For the first time in her life, she was ready to hear the truth. I opened the door to find Melissa standing there, her face pale, her hands gripping a manila folder so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Something in her expression made my stomach turn. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping aside so she could come in. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she stepped inside, her gaze flickering to Ethan and Emma, who were playing quietly in the living room. Melissa took a shaky breath and turned to face me. "I found something," she said. I didn't have time to brace myself before she thrust the folder into my hands. I frowned, flipping it open. My eyes scanned the first document, then stopped. Adoption records. I blinked, read it again. No, this had to be a mistake. I looked up, searching Melissa's face for some kind of explanation, some kind of reassurance that I was misunderstanding this. But she just nodded. Tears welled in her eyes. "It's true," she whispered. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the papers in my hands, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. "This can't be real," I murmured, shaking my head. Melissa didn't say anything. It wasn't real, it couldn't be. Except memories started flooding back. The way my parents always treated me differently from Melissa. The way I never quite fit. The way their love had always felt like something I had to earn. The offhand comments they had made over the years. "You were always so difficult, Lauren. Melissa is just more like us. You should be grateful we gave you a home." I thought they were just being cruel. I thought they were just playing favorites. I never once thought it was because I wasn't theirs to begin with. I sank onto the couch, my hands still clutching the papers, my fingers shaking. Melissa sniffled, wiping at her eyes. Her voice cracked. She took a deep breath and tried again. "I'm so sorry, Lauren." I looked at her, truly looked at her. For the first time, I saw the guilt weighing her down, the guilt of believing their lies, the guilt of being the chosen daughter. "I never questioned them," she whispered. "Not once. And I should have. I should have felt angry. I should have felt betrayed. But I didn't. I just felt numb." I set the papers down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The truth was right in front of me, but I felt like I was floating above it, like none of this was real. All my life, I had been chasing something that never existed, a family that was never mine, a love that had never been real. Melissa wiped her nose and let out a bitter laugh. "Say something," she begged. "Yell at me. Get mad. Something." I turned my head to look at her, and then, for the first time in my life, I said the words I never thought I would say. "They never loved me." Melissa flinched, but I wasn't done. "And that's okay." She stared at me wide-eyed, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I let out a long breath. "Because I love myself." The words settled in the air between us, as final as a closing door. Melissa started crying again, harder this time. But I wasn't crying, because for the first time in my life, I felt free. It was late when Melissa finally left. She hugged me tightly before she went, whispering, "I love you," into my ear like it was a promise. I believed her. When the apartment was quiet again, I sat at the kitchen table, the adoption papers still spread out before me. I traced my fingers over my birth name, a name I had never known, a history I had never been given. I didn't belong to them. I never had. And then, just as I was beginning to feel like I could breathe again, there was a knock at the door. A letter had arrived. From Diane. The letter sat on my kitchen table for 2 days before I finally opened it. I had stared at it, traced the edges of the envelope, turned it over in my hands, but I hadn't been ready. Now, sitting alone in a quiet cafe, I unfolded the paper and braced myself. "Lauren, I know you're angry. I know you think we don't love you, but that's not true. We raised you, we gave you everything, and now you've turned your back on us. How could you do this? Do you know what you're putting us through? The stress? The humiliation? The financial disaster? I never told you about your adoption because it didn't matter. You were ours. You still are. No matter what you think, you will always be our daughter. Please, let's put this behind us. Come home. Let's be a family again. Mom?" I folded the letter and set it down on the table. A slow, steady exhale escaped my lips. Even now, even after everything, she still didn't understand. She thought I was punishing them. She thought this was about money, about pride, about winning some twisted battle. She still didn't see me. I had agreed to meet them, not because I needed closure, but because I needed to say goodbye, for the last time. They were already waiting when I arrived. My mother's face lit up when she saw me, like she truly believed I had come back to make peace. My father just watched me carefully, calculating. I sat down across from them, my back straight, my heart pounding. "Lauren," Diane said, reaching for my hand across the table. I pulled away before she could touch me. Her smile faltered. "I got your letter," I said simply. She let out a breath, nodding eagerly. I meant every word. I tilted my head, studying her. "Did you?" She hesitated. Mark cleared his throat. "Lauren, this is getting ridiculous. You're blowing this entire situation out of proportion." I stared at him. "I found the adoption papers." Silence. Diane's breath hitched. My father's jaw clenched. They knew, and they weren't even going to deny it. Diane let out a slow exhale. "It doesn't change anything." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "It changes everything." Mark rolled his eyes. "This is exactly what we're talking about. You're so dramatic." I straightened in my seat, meeting his gaze head on. "You lied to me for 33 years, I said calmly. "You made me believe I was part of this family, but I was never your daughter, was I? I was your insurance policy, your financial backup plan." "That's not fair," Diane whispered. "No?" I leaned forward slightly. "Then tell me something. If Melissa had been the one who made more money, would you have demanded the same from her?" Neither of them answered. I nodded. "That's what I thought." Mark sighed loudly. "Lauren, listen." "No," I cut him off, my voice steady. "You listen. I spent my entire life trying to be enough for you, trying to earn love that should have been given freely. And you used me. You never saw me as a daughter. You saw me as an investment." Mark scowled, his patience wearing thin. "You're being dramatic." There it was again, the same dismissal, the same refusal to see me. I sat back, exhaling slowly. "I want you to hear this," I said, voice firm. "Really hear it. We were never family, not in the way that matters. You don't own me. You don't get to guilt me, manipulate me, or control me anymore." My mother's hands were trembling. "Lauren, please." I stood up. "I hope you figure things out," I said, grabbing my purse, "but it won't be at my expense." And then I walked away. The air felt lighter when I stepped outside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying something I could never put down. I didn't owe them anything. I didn't have to prove anything. I didn't have to fight anymore. I was free. When I got home, Ethan and Emma came running to the door. "Mommy!" Emma giggled as I scooped her up. Ethan clung to my leg, laughing. I pressed a kiss to Emma's forehead, holding her close. I had spent so long chasing family, but the truth was, I had already built one of my own, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. Before we wrap up this story, I want to leave you with something to think about. For years, I believed that family was about duty, obligation, and sacrifice. I thought love was something you earned, not something that was freely given. I spent my life chasing approval, trying to prove my worth to people who only saw me as a resource, not as a daughter, not as a person with my own needs, dreams, and struggles. But here's what I've learned. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by love, respect, and the way people show up for you. Sometimes, the people who should love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. And when that happens, we have a choice. We can keep begging for love that will never come. Or we can choose ourselves. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. Walking away from toxic relationships isn't cruel. Choosing to protect your peace, your children, and your future isn't abandoning your family. It's breaking the cycle of pain. It's deciding that you deserve better. So I ask you, have you ever felt trapped by expectations that weren't fair to you? Have you ever had to walk away from someone who was supposed to love you? How did it change you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched you, drop a 1 in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. And if you disagree, tell me why. Let's have that conversation. And most importantly, if you want to hear more real, powerful stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Thanks for watching. And remember, you are worth more than someone else's expectations. Love.